Erfurt, the capital city of Thuringen, with just over 200,000 residents, is one of the best preserved historic cities in Germany. Take this medieval bridge, for example. That's right, this is a bridge. Most of what you see here dates back to the 14th century. The Krämerbrücke, the Merchant's Bridge. It's one of Erfurt's best-known landmarks. Bridges built with shops and homes once existed all over Europe. Very few still survive today. This is a particularly well-kept example, though, like almost everything in Europe, it has been rebuilt, repaired, altered, and adapted over generations. And despite its age, this is still an ordinary part of the city. People live here, people shop here, and people walk to work here. Today the bridge is beautifully restored, but during the 4 decades of the DDR, large parts of the old city simply weren't further developed. After reunification in 1990, enormous amounts of money have been poured back into the city for restoration and renovation. What remains today is not a frozen medieval town. One of my favorite architectural aspects of Europe is how modern buildings, like this glass facade ice cream parlor, exist comfortably beside centuries of history. Just beyond the bridge is an unexpectedly famous resident of Erfurt, Bernd das Brot, a chronically depressed loaf of bread, and somehow a beloved German children's television character. Currently, an astronaut. I don't really get it. Erfurt today seems perfectly comfortable mixing old and new. A working city with medieval churches, grocery stores, restored buildings, and modern facades. Most importantly, ordinary life. And unlike some historic districts that feel staged for tourists, Erfurt still feels full of life and lived in. For centuries, this was one of the commercial centers of Thuringen. Trade routes passed through here long before Germany existed as a unified country. Even now, craftsmanship remains part of the city's identity. The Rathaus dominates the Fischmarkt, much the way it has for generations. Imperial Germany, the Weimar Republic, the Third Reich, East Germany, and now reunified Germany. Along Marktstraße, everyday commerce continues inside buildings older than entire countries. And eventually, almost every walk through Erfurt seems to lead here, the Domplatz. The Mariendom und Severikirche dominate the city skyline much the way they have for centuries. The cathedral seen today is largely Gothic, though parts of the site reach back far earlier. Like much of Europe, it is less a single building than the accumulation of generations. The Jungfrauportal tells a layered story, the 5 foolish and 5 wise virgins of the New Testament. The door, representing Christ, is the entrance. In the center is Saint Michael. He's the gatekeeper, and he's slaying the demon. In 1996, I adopted St. Michael as my own patron saint. He's my namesake. And in 2026, I've continued my youthful tradition. Some things, like this 300-year-old linden tree, remind us that time has its own priorities. Inside Severikirche, the city noise falls almost immediately away. Spaces like this, and works like this 16th century Marian altar, were designed to overwhelm the senses. Height, scale, stone. Organs also became statements of wealth, permanence, and authority. Statements were even made in death, like this 17th century burial slab for a dean of the church. Even now, places like this still encourage silence. From the cathedral steps, Erfurt stretches out in all directions like a wheel. These beautifully restored and well-maintained facades belie the often turbulent history of this city. These buildings had a very different life just 40 years ago, when they were still East German. Not a frozen medieval town, but something much more complicated. Erfurt's historic center survives today not because it was frozen in time, but because generations continued finding new uses for old spaces. And sometimes by simply not touching them at all. Around almost every corner, another reminder appears that parts of this city are genuinely old. Some cities preserve history in museums. Erfurt, on the other hand, often just leaves it sitting beside the street. In fact, these timber frame houses, they date back to 1415. Housing for poor university students, just a whisper of how important Erfurt once was as a center of learning. Children playing beneath medieval buildings probably feels perfectly ordinary if you grew up here. And life of all kinds continues to swim here. With reminders that children still inhabit the space next to centuries-old bridges. Schnetterinchen und Moppi, familiar to generations of East German children, still watch over the park today. An Egyptian goose. Not everything here is native, and not everything needs to be. Erfurt is not a frozen medieval city. It's something far more complicated. But, as always, your mileage may vary.